July the 1st. The gates of a stately home in Northamptonshire swing open for the year, and they do it on this exact date for one reason only, because today is the day Diana was born. Her brother said it himself plainly on a quiet Instagram post nobody outside the fan accounts noticed. The house is open for July and August, bookended by the 1st of July, her birthday, and the 31st of August, the day she died. 65 years since that bedroom in Norfolk, 29 since that tunnel in Paris. And the calendar this family lives by was set deliberately around a woman who has been dead for almost 3 decades. Now look, while that gate was swinging open this morning, 6,000 miles away in California, 2 children were getting ready for a flight none of us were supposed to know about yet. A 7-year-old, a 5-year-old whose middle name was chosen, in her parents' own words, to honour her grandmother. And somewhere between Montecito and Northamptonshire, this family's about to find out again that they have never once agreed on how to keep her safe. Honestly, I want to start with the gate, not the flight, because the gate tells you something the flight can't. A private family, the Spencers, decided 3 decades ago that the public could come and grieve on exactly 2 months a year, and they fixed those 2 months to her life and her death, not to a press release, not to an anniversary tour, not to anyone's convenience. That is devotion with no committee behind it. Compare that to the family she married into, where every act of remembrance gets negotiated, timed, and occasionally vetoed. Here is what I cannot get past. The people who are supposed to be her actual family, the in-laws, the institution, the crown, have spent 29 years arguing about how to handle her memory. Statues delayed, documentaries disputed, a coroner's inquest that took years. Meanwhile, her brother just opens a gate every July the 1st and lets strangers leave flowers at a temple he didn't even build for her. The Spencers didn't need a meeting to decide she mattered. The Windsors are still having that meeting. That contradiction is the whole story today. So let me say the argument plainly, because I think it's worth being honest about what I believe. She won the public's heart so completely that the institution still has to schedule around her. 65 years after her birth and 29 after her death. And the son she raised is, this month, choosing her house over theirs. You remember her even if you never met her. Maybe you remember the wedding in 1981, the dress with the 25-foot train, the joke she made on television the night before about marrying whoever turned up. Maybe what you remember is later, the recorded confession Charles gave in 1994, admitting to the affair on camera while she was still his wife. Maybe it's the interview the next year, the one where she sat in that blue dress and told the nation there were 3 people in her marriage. So it was a bit crowded. None of that is interpretation. That's just what happened on camera in front of the whole country. I'll say it as plainly as I can, and I'll mark it as what it is. My read, not a fact. I think that marriage was never going to survive the moment Camilla Parker Bowles refused to leave the picture. And I think Diana knew it years before the rest of us did. That's opinion. Here's what the record does show. By 1996, the divorce was final. By 1997, she was gone. And the boy who walked behind her coffin that September was 15 years old, in front of the entire world, and he was not allowed to break. If you watch that walk, you remember the small white card on the wreath that simply said, "Mummy." You don't forget a thing like that. A child grieving the most public way a child has ever grieved while the family around him stayed composed because that is what they are trained to do. That boy is 43 now, and the way he runs his side of this family was built, I think, almost entirely as an answer to that walk. Patient, controlled, methodical to the point of coldness, some say, but righteous in his own mind, because he watched what happens when this family lets a wife, a mother, a Diana get treated as disposable. He inherited the Duchy of Cornwall in September of 2022, the same week his grandmother died, and with it came real money, real land, real independence from the king. He didn't have to ask permission for that. The rules simply handed it to him the day his father became monarch. Here is what I think, and I will say plainly, it is what I think. William's entire project, watching him for years now, looks like an attempt to never again let this family be the reason a woman like his mother gets ground down by an institution that moves too slowly to protect her. Make of that what you will. But I'd ask you to hold that thought, because it is about to collide with something his brother is doing this very week, and the two of them are answering the same wound in two completely different directions. Princess Anne is the one figure in this story who watched the whole thing from the closest possible distance, and not as a bystander either. In the early 1970s, before Camilla ever married Andrew Parker Bowles, she and Anne were involved, a real, documented, public record fact, verified, not gossip. They stayed friends for the rest of their lives regardless. He has even stood in for her at memorials in recent years, which means Anne has watched Camilla move through 3 different versions of this family's story, decades before Diana ever showed up. I can't read Anne's mind, and I won't pretend to. But I don't think it's a coincidence that the person with the longest memory in this family is also the one who says the least about any of it publicly. Because here is what actually changed inside the institution while the rest of us were watching the public side of the story. In 2022, Parliament passed the Councillors of State Act, quietly widening the list of working royals who can stand in for the monarch, adding Anne and Edward to a role that had been narrowing for years. Annabel Elliot, Camilla's sister, stepped back from formal involvement in the Duchy's affairs around the same period the title passed to William. Royal warrants, the official seal of approval companies fight for, were reissued and reshuffled. None of that made headlines the way a wedding does. But it tells you who this family has decided gets to hold power going forward and who quietly doesn't. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly why every one of those decisions landed the way it did. Royal reporting depends on access, and access depends on staying on good terms with the people you're covering. So read every official explanation with that in mind. What I will say is this: an institution that moves that carefully, that deliberately, about who holds formal power is not an institution that moves slowly by accident. It moves slowly on purpose when it wants to, and it moves fast when it wants to do that instead. Remember that. It matters for what happens next. Now, here's where this gets uncomfortable, because the same family that can reorganise councillors of state, reissue royal warrants, and quietly shift the Duchy of Cornwall to William inside a matter of months, cannot, after years of trying, agree on a security plan for 2 of its own grandchildren. Harry and Meghan are due in the country from the 7th to the 11th of July, the first time they're bringing both children home in 4 years. The trip is built around real charity work. Scotty's Little Soldiers, Well Child, the Invictus Games, not a publicity stunt, not a reconciliation tour. And still, days before the flight, Harry's spokesperson put out a statement saying he's worried about whether proper protective security will be in place. The same fight he's been having with the government body that decides these things for years now. His own people said plainly that accommodation has never been the issue. The issue is whether anyone will keep his children safe once they land. Sit with that for a second. King Charles reportedly offered the Sussexes a stay at a royal residence with police protection attached and got no public answer. He made the same offer once before, accommodation at Buckingham Palace, and Harry turned that down too. So somewhere in this story is a father trying, in the only language this family seems to know, property, protection, formal offers, to bring his son back inside the walls. And a son who, by every account, keeps choosing not to walk through that particular door. Here's the part most channels covering this get wrong. They frame it as Harry snubbing his father. I don't read it that way at all. I think Harry has spent years asking this institution for one specific thing: guaranteed government-level protection for his children, the kind that isn't a gift the king can offer or withdraw, and the institution has never been able to give him a straight yes. So he keeps landing on British soil and looking for somewhere else to put his family, somewhere the safety isn't a favour. And that brings us to the gate I opened with. Because while Buckingham Palace can't settle a security question that's dragged on for years, Althorp settled its own question 30 years ago and never had to revisit it. Reports this week say the Sussexes may stay there during the visit. The place isn't just sentimental, it's the one location in this entire story where nobody has to ask anyone's permission. Harry's own family runs it. His own family decides who's welcome. And the timing is almost too on the nose to be real, except that it is. Althorp closes to the public on exactly the 10th and 11th of July, the very days Harry and Meghan are due in the country. For 2 days, the gates that open every July 1st for strangers close instead for family. Make of the timing what you will. I won't tell you it proves a plan. But I will tell you Harry has used Althorp before as a base when his uncle's funeral brought him back in 2024, and years earlier he brought Meghan to visit his mother's resting place itself, the small island on the lake there, reachable only by boat, kept that way for exactly the privacy and protection this whole family keeps failing to organise anywhere else. He once asked to be buried on that island himself, beside her. The request was turned down. He chose Frogmore instead, the same grounds where he married Meghan. 2 different answers to the same question. Where does a son go to feel safe with his mother? And only one of them required anybody's permission. That's the first thing I'd call genuinely shareable about this whole story. And it's not invented. It's sitting right there in the public record if you go looking. The man who was told no when he asked to lie beside his own mother is the same man who, this July, may bring her grandchildren to stand on that ground instead, on the one stretch of British soil where his last name still means something without an asterisk attached to it. Now, I cannot tell you for certain what's in Harry's head walking into this. No one outside that family can. But here is the pattern I keep coming back to. Every single time this institution makes him wait, makes him negotiate, makes him apply for safety like it's a favour, he turns around and goes to the one place that never made him ask twice. And the people calling that a snub against William, against Charles, against the family, I think they've got the story backwards. I don't think this is about rejecting them. I think it's about a son who learned a long time ago that his mother's house keeps its promises. and the institution his father runs sometimes doesn't. So let's talk about the part of this family that has, this year, finally had a promise enforced on them, because it tells you everything about how consequence actually moves in this institution when it wants to move. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, and notice he doesn't even get to use the name Andrew, Duke of York anymore, announced last October that he'd stop using his titles voluntarily, under pressure, before the palace forced the issue itself 2 weeks later by opening a formal process to strip him of everything that remained. By February of this year, he'd been arrested. The first time a senior royal has faced that in living memory, on suspicion of misconduct in public office, and released under investigation. He surrendered the lease on Royal Lodge. He's living in converted accommodation on the Sandringham estate now. And this June, for the first time, there was no quiet compromise made for him at all. No invitation to even the private side of Garter Day, the kind of small mercy the family used to extend. A YouGov poll this year found 82% of the British public think he should be stripped of his place in the succession entirely. Here's the part I find genuinely cold, and I'll mark it as my reading because it is one. This family can move with real, visible speed when it decides someone has become a liability. Andrew went from prince to private citizen with no title in a matter of months once the pressure got loud enough, but asked that same family to settle in writing a permanent security guarantee for 2 children who carry the Spencer bloodline and the Windsor name both. And suddenly the process takes years with no resolution in sight. I'm not accusing anyone of a crime here. I'm asking you to notice what gets decided fast in this family and what gets allowed to drift. And maybe that's the real twist sitting underneath this whole story, the one that only shows up once you've watched it from a distance the way we just have. It isn't that William and Harry are locked in some grand, deliberate battle for who controls their mother's legacy. It's that neither one of them had to fight for it at all. William got the duchy the moment the crown passed to his father. No contest, no negotiation, just the rules doing what the rules always do. And Harry has somewhere safe to take his children the moment he needs it. Not because anyone granted it to him, but because his mother's brother opened a gate 30 years ago and simply never closed it on his family. Nobody had to move against Andrew for the family to lose him. The same documents and decisions that built him up were always going to be the ones capable of taking him apart, once enough people decided to read them honestly. And nobody has to invite Harry home either, because Diana already built the one home in this story that doesn't require an invitation at all. This was never going to be settled by a reconciliation, a handshake on a palace lawn, the photograph everyone keeps hoping for. I don't think William and Harry are circling toward that this July, and if you're hoping for it, I'd brace yourself now rather than later. What I think actually happens is quieter than that and more permanent. The institution keeps moving at the speed it chooses to move at, fast against Andrew, slow on everything involving Harry's children, and Diana's own ground keeps doing what it's done every July the 1st for 30 years now, opening for nobody's permission but her own family's. She would have turned 65 today. Her gates ask nothing of anyone, and they never have. The palace, meanwhile, is still negotiating. I'll let you decide which one of those sounds more like love. So tell me, where were you the night Diana told the world there were 3 people in her marriage? And did you ever think, watching it then, that 30 years later, her own grandchildren would still be the ones the family can't agree how to protect?